Hi everybody, I'm Kayla Pierce, and I'm here to talk to you briefly about the Synoptic Gospels. Okay, so we know that there are 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but only 3 of them are the Synoptic Gospels. So why is this? Why is John not included, right? We like John. John's got good stuff. Why is he not considered, or his gospel not considered with the other gospels to be a part of the synoptic gospels? There are a lot of reasons for this, but for time's sake, I'm just going to cover 3, okay? So the first thing that helps me distinguish John from the other gospels is the overlap of content. Okay, so to put this in perspective for you, 90% of Mark's material is found in Luke, but only 10% of John's material is found in all of the other books. So it kind of helps you get a sense. There's a lot of stories that are unique to John, right? Good stories like when Jesus turns water into wine, the woman at the well, the pool of Bethesda. Some of my favorite stories are actually only found in John, where the other Gospels, they're reporting the same stories, of course, from different kind of lenses and perspectives or portraits, but much of John's content is unique. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke share more content with each other than John does. So that's the first thing. So the content. The second thing is time. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written closer in time together, and John was written a little bit later. We can also think about time in another way. So in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the time that's covered in the Gospels, as far as the stories of Jesus, like the section of Jesus' life that is portrayed, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that's only about 12 to 18 months of his life, where John covers much more time in Jesus' life, okay? About 2 or 3 years, actually, of Jesus' ministry. So we can think about that. So content distinguishes or differentiates John. Time, the time it was written, but also the time covered, differentiates John. And then finally, the audience. Now, one of the coolest things about each gospel is that it's written to a particular audience. Each author had an audience in mind. Okay, so for example, Matthew is written to the Jews, and we see this in several ways throughout the gospel. So for example, there are ties to or parallels with Moses. This would have been really important to the Jewish people. Matthew also was very careful to tie Jesus to the lineage of David, okay? These are things that really mattered to the Jews. He wove in Old Testament quotes. Mark was written to the Romans, and we can even see this and then the way that Mark included the way in which the Roman soldier was the first to realize after Jesus' death that they had killed the Messiah, right? And Mark is careful to include this point. Luke was written to the Greeks. You may not pick up on it, but Luke, he opens the chapter in a way that would have been very familiar to Greeks, and he includes much about humanity, which Greeks would have cared deeply about. He was writing to that audience. Okay, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke are written to these very particular audiences, although they're shared and passed around and everyone enjoys them. John, on the other hand, of course, remember, was written a little bit later in time, was written to all men. Just in general, cared deeply about establishing the identity of Jesus in a way that was different than the other Gospels. So for those 3 reasons, just 3 of many more, we could talk about what makes John different than the other Gospels. And in closing, I'd like to say this. I think that we can really think about the way in which these authors wrote to audiences at heart in our own lives when we're thinking about sharing the gospel with people that we know, that we should think about our audience, anticipate the questions that the people we're sharing Jesus with may anticipate, and be ready to answer them accordingly. How we present the gospel, how I would present it to a colleague may be different than I would present it to my baby sister who is like 11, right? All those the contextual, the message is the same, but how I would present it varies. And this is modeled by these great people that were inspired by the Holy Spirit. So I hope you learned something today.